The decision to walk away from it was really grounded in my fundamental belief and commitment to capital discipline. We could have won. We could have outbid the other company, but we would have reinforced what I think investors found as their biggest criticism of our industry.
Welcome to Grey Matter. I'm Declan Kelly, founder, chairman, and CEO of Consello. I've spent the last 30 plus years advising the CEOs who are leading the world's top companies. If there's one thing I've learned in that time, the best leaders think differently. That wiring, that grey matter, separates the truly exceptional leaders from everyone else. Understanding it is what allows us at Consello to help the best in the world be even better. This podcast exists because the most accomplished leaders agreed to sit down and talk about something they rarely discuss publicly: how their minds actually work. Mike Wirth has spent more than 4 decades at Chevron, leading in an industry where decisions are measured in years, not in moments. As chairman and CEO, he has faced several choices that tested his discipline as well as his conviction. He walked away from the Anadarko acquisition despite the reputational risk and the belief that Chevron would eventually prevail in a bidding contest for that company. Conversely, during the Hess transaction, he chose to see it through, even as the deal faced extended scrutiny and delays, prompted by what many saw as unnecessary objections from its largest competitor. 18 months later, his argument prevailed at the International Court of Arbitration. Those choices reflect a leadership style rooted in pragmatism, shaped by an understanding that durability matters more than visibility, and checking your ego at the door is often the greatest leadership strength of all. This is Grey Matter. Mike Wirth, great to see you. Thank you for joining me on Grey Matter.
It's good to be here, Declan.
So we're sitting here overlooking this beautiful landscape of Houston in Texas, and everybody chooses the location where we do these interviews. So tell me where we're here.
Well, Houston's my new home, and moved our company last year after 145 years in California, and I thought it was appropriate to invite you to my new home.
So that decision to make that move after 145 years was something that I'm sure you thought long and hard about. What was it like to have to do that, given the cultural history and the attachment to California?
Our company is part of California's history. We made the first oil discovery in the state in Pico Canyon in 1879. We were part of the growth of the state, and our people have been incredibly connected to every aspect of California. And so at that level, it was breaking this long, deep historical tie. At a personal level, it was difficult because I have spent more of my adult life there than anywhere else. And we have a lot of employees that I knew were reluctant to leave, some of whom won't leave, that are good friends of mine. At a professional level, my responsibility is to our company and to set our company up for success. And at that level, the decision was not if, it was just when.
Because of taxation and all the other laws that were being applied in California that were just impossible to deal with anymore.
Those don't make it easy, but we still have businesses in California that are going to be subject to California policies. Houston really is the epicenter of our industry.
Right.
It's where our partner companies are, the service companies that we work closely with, the universities that we do research with and recruit from. And it was increasingly where more and more of our people were. And I felt it was important for our people to be together here, our leadership to be together here, and to be part of this community. And so it really is the right place for our company.
Every time I do this with a CEO, I'm trying to figure what is the right thematic framework for the person that I'm interviewing. And you and I have worked together for many years, and the way I think about you is sort of pragmatic discipline over ego. It's an interesting thing because you're extraordinarily disciplined, you're a very pragmatic leader, and I don't see much evidence of ego. And I think all of this is usually rooted in how somebody grew up and their background and what framed them. What was your upbringing like? What was it like growing up?
I grew up in a fairly normal middle-class family. My father was an engineer. My mother was an artist. I was born in New Mexico. My father was working at the Los Alamos National Lab at the time. I had this very interesting right brain, left brain family experience. My parents were very different in almost every dimension. An engineer, an artist, a Republican, a Democrat, a free spirit, a disciplined engineer. And I found myself, I think, the beneficiary, the blend of both of those things. I'm the oldest of 4 children and grew up playing a lot of sports. And I think the lessons I learned in competition are things that I benefit from today, working together as a team, having an overarching goal that brings everyone together, learning how to deal with success and failure and learn from both of those. And so I do think much of who I am today, I can trace back to the experiences growing up in a little town outside of Denver, Golden, Colorado.
I read about an experience that you've talked a little bit about, but not a lot, when you were a basketball player and you had an interesting experience with your coach one day. How important was that?
I was playing high school basketball and I had broken my thumb. I caught a pass at the tip of my thumb and it fractured my thumb. Couldn't practice because I had a cast on. My coach was training for the Ironman. This is in the very early days of the Ironman triathlon. I didn't even know what it was. And so he was a fitness fanatic. And he told me the first day I showed back up at practice with this cast on, he said, let's go out for a run. And I thought, okay, we're going to go for a jog around the track. We start running through the town, and pretty soon I realized we're headed towards the base of a mountain called Lookout Mountain. And Colton sits a little bit over 5,000 feet. The top of Lookout Mountain's over 7,000 feet, and it's a very windy set of switchbacks to get to the top. And as we got to the bottom, I said, Mr. Myers, where are we going? He says, well, we're going to run to the top of the mountain. And I said, no, really, where are we going? And he said, we're going to the top of the mountain. Come on. And we kept running. I had never run that far. I had never thought I could run that far or up a steady grade like that. And but I was 16 years old, and this was my coach. I'm not gonna say I can't do this. So off we went, and eventually we reached the top of the mountain, which is one of several places where Buffalo Bill is allegedly buried. And he used to run with his car keys kind of tucked into the waistband of his shorts. I thought, okay, he must have his car parked up at the top, and we're going to drive back down. And we got up to the top and took a lap around the parking lot, and we started running back down the mountain. And I learned if there's one thing harder than running up a mountain, it's running down. But at the end of it all, I accomplished it. Something I never would have imagined I would have done, but I could do it. And in reflecting on that over time, I realized that he knew I could do something that I didn't know I could do. And I've learned over time that the limits that most people are constrained by are the ones that they impose on themselves. And the people that accomplish big things are the ones that don't perceive boundaries or limits. And they reach much further than the average person does. And one of the things I do now as I work with others is I try to see the things in them that they might not see in themselves and have the confidence in them and support them the way my coach did to actually achieve things that they never imagined they could do. And I find that to be the most rewarding part of my job.
A significant part of that, though, is discipline. And I know you're very, very focused on fitness and physical discipline, regimen, etc., and also routine and making sure that as an engineer, I think you've probably got a lot of processes around how you manage things. So how important in leading your leadership team and the people around you is that whole approach to discipline? And like, how often do you try to bring that into play when you're working with them?
Well, we're in a business that demands discipline. We work in very challenging and dangerous environments. Our people around the world are in some of the most extreme environments that you can imagine. And that requires discipline. Running a large organization takes routine, it takes discipline, and I've learned over the course of my life, I'm at my best when I'm in a routine. And having grown up playing sports, I learned the value of trying to stay fit. I'm married to an athlete, and I get kids that have played college sports and the like. And so I do know that I'm best when I'm kind of getting enough sleep, when I'm getting enough exercise, and that all is part of a routine that defines my day as best it can when I travel and do other things. And I try to bring some of that same discipline into my job.
You still getting up at 3:45 in the morning?
This morning it was 4, but
Backing, you got to be careful.
yeah, I'm slipping. Yeah, I've learned as I get older, I don't need as much sleep as I once did. And so I tend to wake up earlier, and that's a good time to try to get my exercise in before the day gets busy. And I can catch up with the world and do my workout with the news on or ESPN on. And I try to start my day that way.
So that discipline, I think the Anadarko and Hess examples to me were several really good examples of that discipline in action. Also pragmatism and frankly the low ego that I talked about. So let's talk about them in turn. So with Anadarko, you had the opportunity to try and buy the company, and then you had built in a $1 billion break fee. And I remember one morning talking to you about it and the decision that you made to walk away. And at the time, there was lots of criticism. People going, well, why would you do this? This is something that you should buy, and it's obvious. And afterwards, of course, you were absolutely right, because it would have been a very, very, very bad decision for the company. Yet you walked away with $1 billion of a breakup fee, which the shareholders subsequently were thrilled to receive, of course. What was it like to be you during that time? That was a very, very tough decision to have to make, but at the end, it was the right one.
It would have been a good deal for us at the price that we did the deal. There hasn't been a history in our industry really of interlopers. Transactions have generally gone through and kind of been respected by other parties, but no reason that they can't be challenged. In this case, another company felt that they were I think they used the words like the rightful owner of Anadarko, came in with a stronger offer than ours after we had already signed the deal. And then even kind of changed that and strengthened it a little bit more. And we never ultimately made a counter offer. It was probably the first big decision, really big decision I had to make in this role. And it wasn't easy because we liked the deal. But I also came in with a belief that our industry needed to demonstrate capital discipline, and that our company should be a leader in demonstrating capital discipline. And I'd made that clear to our employees and actually to our investors as well. This was going to get into a bidding war, and we were very sure that the other party, if we made a counter, would make another counter. What we would do is likely drive value out of the deal for our shareholders and not demonstrate the kind of discipline that I think our industry should have. And so that sat at the core of a very difficult decision. In fact, most of my leadership team, when I kind of had the final meeting and asked for their advice, said, "Let's do this. We're a bigger company. We can win." And we could have won. We could have outbid the other company, and eventually they would have had to drop out. But we would have reinforced what I think investors found as their biggest criticism of our industry, is that we would lose our discipline and we would pay any price to acquire volume and to grow. And so the decision to walk away from it was really grounded in my fundamental belief and commitment to capital discipline. And we did have a good team that negotiated a strong contingency in the event that the deal didn't close. And so we did walk away with $1 billion for a few weeks. And the company that acquired it then, is still to this day saddled with some unique debt and other things that were required to get the deal done, which, obviously we never had to go to a place like that.
We'll come back to that concept of discipline, capital discipline, in a minute, because when you think about the way you've reframed Chevron, I think you've become known especially for that. But the second example of discipline that I want to talk about is Hess. To me, what was fascinating about this was the consequences of the consequences, as my old mentor Don Keogh used to say. If this had stood, then the entire rule of law and precedent for the industry, for M&A, for everything that had happened in the past and perhaps in the future would have gone out the window and made impossible for people to actually do deals together. In reality, lots of people predicting bad things for the future of this company and for you if it hadn't gone the other way. Yet you made a decision, we're in the right here, and we're going to stick to our guns, and we're going to wait until the very end of this process, no matter how long it takes. Then one day you wake up and it's a 3-0 victory and you close the deal a few hours later. Being you in the middle of all of that, everything being called into question, and to have to come out the other end the way you did, it was a pretty remarkable achievement. Not many of those things happen in business anymore. So what was that like for you?
Well, the first principle that you talk about, I think, is important for me to say a word about, which is in our industry, more often than not, on large investments, companies come together to share risk, share technology, share people. And so we form agreements to own certain percentages and work together in these projects. Often, usually in these agreements, there is a provision that if one of the partners decides to sell, the other partners could match that price. And that allows you to have some measure of control over who might come in. If they're not a party that's as financially strong or technically capable, the existing partners can say, we'll take that share, or we can pass on it if we think the price is too high or we think there's a good partner to come in. So these are fairly common rights of first refusal at an asset level that exist around the world. What was asserted in this case is that at a corporate transaction where these really aren't intended to apply, because it would allow, if at every corporate merger, each project could trigger these rights of first refusal, people could cherry pick assets out of transactions and strip the value out of companies. And so it would undermine the premise upon which small companies become bigger, become acquired, people create value. So there really was this fundamental principle involved. More importantly, there was a very specific contract involved, and the contract had very clear language to be administered under English law. And as we looked at the deal before we did it, this was viewed as the single greatest risk to the transaction would be a challenge like this. And so we spent an extraordinary amount of time with internal counsel, outside counsel, and a whole series of kind of red team, blue team challenges to this, to say, what if this clause were to be asserted by Exxon? And how would we handle it? So the deal was structured to account for this. We sought a way to resolve it in the beginning in a way that we thought would be mutually acceptable. Turns out that's not what Exxon preferred, and so we ended up in this protracted arbitration process. Those things test you. It became the dominant element of the narrative around our company, inside the company, outside the company, with investors, with the media, and it was portrayed as this big dramatic fight between the two largest companies in our industry. And so it was difficult to get people to move on and focus on other things. And these things have a binary outcome. And so all of those weigh on the decision makers involved. They weigh on the board of directors. They weigh on the team that's responsible for this. But we were very confident in our position and felt like we had to stand up for our company's rights, stand up for our shareholders, stand up for Hess as well, a company that had a more than 90-year history, only two CEOs, the name of the founder and the current CEO on the company, and very personal to John Hess. And I felt a strong obligation to stand with John, including through some very unfortunate actions on the part of the U.S. government in the antitrust review of the transaction, where John's actions were unfairly characterized, criticized, and at one point a decision made to deny him the ability to serve on our board of directors, which fortunately was reversed actually within 12 hours of when the arbitration outcome was resolved as well. I wish it hadn't gone on that long. I think there was a way to resolve it much more quickly, but you need two people to reach that conclusion, and we didn't have that.
Keeping on the topic of discipline, one of the things you had to do when you came in was take a view at the capital discipline agenda for the company and decide very quickly that you were going to go from, let's call it roughly 50 billion to 15 to 17 billion of capital expenditure. You came in and completely reframed the way the company thought about itself in an industry, as you said earlier, that was, well known for spending a lot of money to try and get growth projects up and running. So you have completely reoriented the company, and some would say the industry in some areas, in terms of how people think about that subject of discipline. Again, I think all of this is rooted in sort of how you grew up and what you think and how you think. But that can't have been easy to come in, and your first decision as CEO was to basically say, you know what, we're not going to do it this way anymore because we can't. What was it like to be you at that moment when you were doing that?
In my mind, there was no choice. I had come up through the downstream side of our business, refining and marketing, which inherently and kind of structurally has always had to be a little more disciplined on capital. Margins are tight. They tend to go down over time. And so I grew up in our company in an environment where every dollar of capital that you spent mattered. We'd been through a period of time in the early 2000s where commodity prices went through a bull run as China came into the WTO and drove a lot of global economic growth. And our entire industry was in pursuit of new resources. At the time, some people will remember there was a fear of peak oil production, that the world would run out of oil, and a belief that you had to go to the most difficult environment, the most extreme projects, and the highest cost to secure the next barrel to meet global demand. And so the whole industry got caught up in a period of time where the pursuit of resource at almost any cost became the prevailing behavior that we saw. We had a bunch of large projects underway at the same time. They weren't executed as well as we would have liked them to have been executed. And on the backside of that, uh, some things externally were changing. We were starting to see shale come into the system to kind of alleviate the concerns about peak oil. But I also believed that our shareholders had lost trust in the industry and in the company to actually seek investments that would deliver returns and value creation for shareholders. And so it was important to send a signal that we were going to respect that, and that we understood that shareholders expected us to return capital to them and to be more disciplined in our allocation of capital spending into our business. And so, to me, it was it was an obvious pivot that we should make. Uh, it was swimming against the current in many ways within the industry because others were not going that direction at the time. Much of the industry has now moved in that direction, uh, and I think over time our shareholders will be rewarded for it. The sector is still not as favored by investors as I think it ought to be, but that's a different topic. So this is fundamental to my beliefs about how the company should behave and how the company should lead.
Speaking of how people should lead, it's a good segue to what I want to talk about next. What I'm fascinated by actually is up close how you manage people. And everybody has a different style. But, you've got a different way of doing this to most other people. I was smiling at the anecdote that you gave several years ago about a woman who used to come and see you every morning, whose name was called Betty, because I think that's the name you used, which I'm sure was an anonymous name. But at the end of the day, you evolved into a leader who shows people how to get to a solution in a very different way. And the outcomes that you get to, you're not telling them what to do with a big wagging finger. You're letting them figure it out for themselves with some guidance, because you've really thought through how you actually lead people in that way.
Well, I'll start with the lesson I learned in my first supervisory job, actually, where I did have a woman who worked for me that would come in every day and plant herself across from my desk and go on at some length about what she was working on. And I was a new supervisor, had a lot of things I felt like I had to do. I was learning how to actually supervise people. And to me, this felt like a colossal time suck. And it was like, how can I get Betty back out of my office? And this went on for quite some time, and I became frustrated. Uh, and then I was talking to one of her colleagues, and her job was to take care of environmental remediation on sites that we had abandoned years ago. It wasn't the most, glamorous job in this group that I ran. Most of the other work was building new things and acquiring new properties and the like. And he said, "You know what? Betty just wants to know that you know what she's doing and that you care." And I reflected on that, and, the next morning, as I walked in, I stopped in the doorway of her office, and I set down my briefcase, and I said, "Betty, what are you working on this morning?" And she told me. I'd ask one or two questions, and I said, "I'm so glad you're on top of this. The company needs this to be handled well." And I went on to my office. I got in the habit of doing that a couple times a week. She never came back into my office again, and what I learned is my initial frustration was because I was looking at things through my eyes. What did I need? I needed more time. I needed somebody to not be in my office so often. And I didn't think about it through the eyes of what she needed. And what she needed was somebody to acknowledge she was doing important work and she was doing a good job. And when I learned I could do that in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, I could control how long the interaction took, and she got what she needed from me, we both were a lot happier. And I've tried to apply lessons like that as I've gone through my career. Uh, what I need is performance, but there's a lot of different ways to deliver it, and everybody's motivated by different things, and everybody needs something different from their supervisor. Some people need advice, some people want instruction, some people want support, Everybody needs a little bit something different, and I've learned that my teams function best when I understand what people need from me, and then I try to give them what they need, and then they give me much more in return.
I think it's interesting. Whenever you do a site visit, you write personal notes to every single person you met, and that can be 40, 60, 80 people each time you do it.
I remember a moment early in my career where I was working in a location where the CEO came to visit, and it was a big deal. Everybody was excited. Presenting to the CEO was an important moment, and I just remember how meaningful it was when I felt like the CEO was interested in what I was doing. I had some small job in some far away part of the business, and now when I visit, I realize that someone in my job paying attention to what is happening around the world matters a lot to our people. And it's a very small thing for me to make sure that I'm paying attention to what each person is working on, and then a short note to thank them for what they're doing and to specifically acknowledge what we talked about sends a signal that everybody matters and that I care about what everybody does. And so that's why I developed the practice of doing it. And it's for me, it's a way to stay connected with the people that I've seen.
The other thing I think is interesting about your leadership style is what I call owning the problem. I remember reading about several things earlier in your career. You said, I ran several spectacularly unsuccessful projects, and that made me a better leader. And, for example, during the course of your leadership, things have happened like the Permian stuff and everything else, where you could have taken the path of, hey, look, this is just life. There's, external forces at work. A lot of CEOs would have done it that way and would have blamed other things. But one of the things I think that people most admire about you in the industry is that when you have a problem, you own it and you come out and you embrace it, you lean into it. It's very unusual management style. Why do you do it?
I had good role models. I remember working for people who um, were held themselves so accountable that no one could ever have higher expectations of them than they had of themselves. And I didn't want to let that leader down because even when I was the one that had caused a problem, had made a mistake, had done something that didn't turn out well, they took the heat for it. And when I did something good, they shared the credit. And so that gave me tremendous freedom to operate, tremendous confidence to lean into problems, and tremendous ownership of something that wasn't going well because I had to fix it because I didn't want my boss to be the one that had to carry that. I learned the power of accountability at an individual level, but also when there was a leader who took on all the accountability and took on all the responsibility when things didn't go well. I saw what it did for the people that worked for them. And of course, I worked for some leaders that did the reverse, and everything they did turned out well, and every problem belongs to somebody who worked for them. And I saw what that did. And one of the things that I've learned over life is oftentimes uh, when I saw something, I said, I want to be sure never to do that. That's as important a lesson as the positive lesson. It's to say, okay, that's a behavior that doesn't help the team, it doesn't motivate people. Remember that so that you don't do that. And so I had great role models that have taught me a lot.
One of the things that you also do that's unusual is you reach out to have lunch with your predecessors several times a year. During COVID, you called them frequently to ask them for advice on how to navigate it. They'd never been through a pandemic, obviously, but they'd been through other things. What motivated you to do that?
Well, our company has a great lineage of CEOs, and I've had the benefit of having my three immediate predecessors available to me, each of whom served for about a decade. The oldest of whom sadly passed last year. But the knowledge that they have, the things that they've lived through, the institutional history that they could share with me is just tremendous. We're a long cycle business, and the things that have preceded my time by 10, 20, 30, 40 years matter today. And having access to people that were involved in those decisions that could help me understand how we reached the point we're at today is very valuable. During COVID, while nobody had been through a pandemic, My predecessors had been through the Gulf War, 9/11, the great financial crisis. They had seen unexpected events that intruded into the global economy and had significant effects on the economy widely and on our company. And the first thing I did is I spoke to each one of them and I said, tell me what you did during 9/11. How did you handle the financial crisis? What did you learn? What worked? What didn't work? As you look back on it today, what would you have done differently? And I've got page after page after page of notes from the conversations. They were so generous with their time and their insights. And at the end, I said, "Well, what would you advise me to do?" And they didn't try to tell me what to do. In fact, the one who would have been kind of characterized as the most gruff said, "Just think about your people. Your people are scared. Everything should be done through the lens of reassuring them that everything is being done to keep them safe." One of them talked about the balance sheet and the financial state of the company and how to navigate that through times when markets would be very turbulent as they were post-COVID. And the third one talked about people around the world and kind of the logistics of dealing with travel. He had been through 9/11 when air travel stopped. During COVID, our ability to move people on and off ships, on and off rigs was constrained. And he had some really interesting thoughts about kind of the operational response that would be required to keep people safe. So there's much more richness to each of the discussions, but without telling me what to do, they shared tremendous insights that helped me. And had I not had their advice, I would have made different decisions and handled it very differently.
You've been in this company 42 years. If you were to cast your mind forward 20 more years, where no doubt you'll still be getting up at 3:45 in the morning, still doing the same thing, what is the one thing that you would hope to have injected into the DNA of the company?
So I'm going to cheat and give you two. One is maintained the focus on safety and protecting the environment that's so essential in our industry. And companies that lose that are at great risk. It's a demanding industry, and our people are in situations every day where the decisions they make have significant consequences. And we've not had a great year this year. And so that is imperative that we maintain that. And I'd like to know, as I look back 20 years from now, that we're stronger on safety than we've ever been. The second thing I would say is I would want our people to have an optimism about the future. This is an industry that can be criticized often from the outside. It's an industry that's so essential to everything that we take for granted in the quality of life that we have, particularly in the developed world, and that people in the developing world are aspiring to. And there can be a lot of negativity around providing the fundamental commodity energy that enables a higher quality of life. Our industry and our company has always innovated and found new solutions to continue to enable human progress. And that takes a spirit of optimism and confidence that we can do that and that we will not only meet the needs of the world today, but we'll meet the needs of the world in the future with new solutions. And I'd like to believe that 20 years from now, our company will have that spirit of optimism and innovation that carries us forward into a future where undoubtedly the criticism will still be there.
42 years, still going strong. Thinking about that coach with the jangling keys who took you up Lookout Mountain, what would he say now?
He'd probably say you could have gone up an even higher mountain.
And I'm sure you will. Mike, this section is called The Uncharted Path. We ask you 4 or 5 rapid fire questions and maybe find out some things about you we didn't do in the earlier interview. What's the question you ask yourself before you make every major decision?
What could go wrong? Generally, you know what's going to go right. What could go wrong?
What looked like failure at the time when you were making a decision, but it turned out to be a hidden accelerator for you and your career in the company?
There was a major acquisition midway through my career that I passionately believed in, and another company intervened and got the deal. A little bit smaller version of what happened with Anadarko. I was crushed at the time. I actually got past it, and I learned a lot from it.
Best piece of advice you ever received, and who did it come from?
Get up off the ground from my football coach.
What's something about you that not many people would know?
I was a phone-a-friend on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire.
Oh my God. And did you get the question right?
No, I didn't get the call because I was in Singapore and the
Oh,
time
okay.
zones were fouled up. But you have like 3 people you could call, and I was on the list.
What's it like to never be able to beat your wife at golf?
I crossed that bridge when I married her. She's a great athlete, and it's a pleasure to be on the course with her, even though I know the outcome before we tee off.
And I've seen it myself firsthand. Julie's an amazing player. My friend, thank you very much. It's great to be with you. I really
Declan,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Thank you, Mike.